The moment her lawyer smiled was the moment I knew something had gone wrong for her. Because lawyers don't smile like that when everything is going according to plan. They smile when someone else has just stepped into a hole they didn't realize was there. And as I watched her confidently slide the papers across the table, manicured nails tapping twice like punctuation, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Calm, not relief, not joy, just calm. The kind that comes when you know the ending, even though everyone else is still watching the beginning. But I'm skipping ahead, and to understand why that smile mattered, you need to understand how we got here, how a man everyone thought had been stripped of everything was actually the only one in the room who hadn't lost control. My name doesn't matter much anymore. Not to her, not to the lawyers, not even to the people who picked sides without asking questions. But for 17 years, I was a husband, a provider, the quiet half of a marriage that looked stable from the outside and hollow if you listened closely enough. We met young, younger than either of us now admits, full of plans that sounded impressive when spoken out loud, and terrifying when you try to live them. She was charismatic, decisive, the kind of person who spoke as if the future owed her something, and I was steady, cautious, the kind of person who made sure the lights stayed on while she talked about moving them to a bigger house. It worked at first, or maybe I just believed it did, because belief is a powerful thing when you want something to succeed badly enough. I built my career slowly, deliberately, while she chased bigger wins and louder validation. And somewhere along the way the balance shifted. My steadiness became boring, my caution became weakness, and her ambition slowly turned. Usually end in one dramatic explosion. They rode quietly, one dismissive comment at a time, one decision made without you, one conversation that doesn't include your opinion because it's assumed you'll agree anyway. By the time she told me she wanted a divorce, it wasn't shouted, it wasn't emotional, it was efficient, like canceling a service she no longer found useful. She had already spoken to a lawyer, already outlined what she wanted: the house, the savings, the investments, the retirement accounts, the business interests, everything we had accumulated together. She said it with confidence, not cruelty, which somehow made it worse, as if she truly believed this was simply how things worked, that she deserved the rewards, and I would adapt to the loss. People assume moments like that are loud, dramatic, full of tears. But this one happened at the kitchen counter while coffee went cold between us. And when I asked what she thought I would do, how she expected me to survive, starting over with almost nothing, she looked genuinely confused, like I'd asked an unreasonable question. "You'll figure it out," she said. "You always do." And that was when I realized how she saw me. Not as a partner, not even as an equal, but as a safety net, something designed to absorb impact, so she never had to feel it herself. The weeks that followed moved fast, faster than I was ready for. Papers appeared, deadlines were set, expectations were communicated as if they were facts. And everyone around us seemed to assume the same thing, that she would win and I would quietly disappear. Friends checked in with her, not me. Family members offered advice that sounded suspiciously like instructions to accept my role gracefully. Even my own instincts tried to convince me that fighting would be pointless, that the path of least resistance was the only one left. I showed up to meetings looking tired, overwhelmed, distracted. I asked simple questions, nodded a lot, agreed more than I disagreed, because there is a strange freedom in being underestimated. When people believe you've already lost, they stop guarding their words. They rush. They assume you're not paying attention. And that's when you learn the most. What she didn't realize was that while she was focused on what she wanted to take, I was focused on what she was eager to get rid of. The details she waved away, the clauses she skimmed, the responsibilities she assumed were minor inconveniences attached to major rewards. I had always been the one who read the fine print, the one who asked what happened if things went wrong instead of assuming they wouldn't, and for years that habit had been quietly protecting us both. But now it was just protecting me. She talked about assets like trophies, like proof that she had won something important, and I listened as if I agreed, as if I shared her excitement about keeping the house, the accounts, the title to everything that looked impressive on paper, While internally I kept track of the obligations attached to each one, the maintenance, the liabilities, the long-term costs. No one brags about at dinner parties. She saw the headline numbers. I saw the footnotes. Mediation became a performance. She arrived confident, prepared, supported by professionals who mirrored her certainty. I arrived subdued, cooperative, almost grateful. I asked for very little, a modest settlement, a clean break, no drawn-out conflict. And that surprised everyone, including her. You're not even going to try. She asked once, not unkindly, just curious, and I shrugged, said I was tired, that I wanted peace, that I didn't have the energy to fight the battle she thought we were having, because the real one was happening somewhere else entirely, behind spreadsheets and schedules and projections that told a very different story than the one she was telling herself. The more cooperative I became, the more confident she grew. And confidence makes people careless. She stopped asking questions, stopped double-checking, stopped listening to the cautious voices around her, because she believed the outcome was already decided. She told people I'd given up, that I knew when I was beaten, and I let that story spread because it served me better than the truth ever could. By the time the final agreement was drafted, it looked exactly the way she wanted, her name on everything that mattered, my name fading into irrelevance. And she smiled when she saw it, that satisfied, victorious smile, the one that assumes the story is over. But stories like this don't end when the papers are signed. They end when the consequences arrive, and those were already on their way, quietly, efficiently, just like the divorce itself. What people don't talk about enough is how winning can feel like momentum. Once someone believes they're on the right side of a story, they stop questioning the direction it's heading. And that was exactly what happened next. The agreement moved toward finalization, signatures scheduled, timelines locked in, and she walked through those weeks lighter than I'd seen her in years, shopping for furniture that would replace things she no longer wanted associated with me, talking openly about renovations, future plans, vacations she deserved after such a difficult chapter. And every time she spoke about what was coming, she spoke as if the work was done, as if possession and freedom were the same thing, nodding, responding when necessary, never correcting her assumptions, because correcting her would have required explaining something she was no longer capable of hearing. I had learned that lesson long before the divorce. There's a point where confidence hardens into certainty, and certainty refuses information that threatens it. She had crossed that line. So, instead of arguing, I prepared, quietly, methodically, the way I always had, the way she had once appreciated and later dismissed as boring. I revisited documents we hadn't discussed in years. Long-term obligations tied to short-term gains. Commitments made during expansion phases when optimism was high and caution was inconvenient. She remembered the announcements, the milestones, the celebrations. I remembered the conditions, the penalties, the structures designed to keep everything moving as long as nothing ever slowed down, and nothing had slowed down yet, at least not on the surface, which made it easy for her to believe she was stepping into security rather than responsibility. The day we met with the mediator for the final review, she arrived early, confident, calm, already talking about what she planned to do once it was officially over. I arrived on time, carrying nothing but the required documents and the same neutral expression I'd perfected over the past few months. The mediator walked us through the terms slowly, carefully, making sure each clause was acknowledged, each transfer confirmed. And every time responsibility was mentioned, her attention drifted. She was already living in the future she thought she had secured. When the mediator asked if we had any questions, she shook her head without hesitation, and when he turned to me, I paused just long enough to appear uncertain before saying no, which seemed to satisfy everyone in the room. Uncertainty reads as weakness when people are quickly after that. Pens moving across paper, names transferred, ownership redefined, and with each page turned, she leaned further back in her chair, relaxed, triumphant. This was the moment she had been working toward, the clean exit, the visible win. And when it was done, She looked at me with something that might have been gratitude or might have been pity. It was hard to tell. "You did the right thing," she said quietly, and I nodded because in that moment she was absolutely right. What happened next wasn't immediate, and that delay mattered because consequences rarely announce themselves right away. They arrive in stages, first as minor inconveniences, then as questions, then as problems no one wants to admit out loud. The first sign came as a phone call she dismissed as routine, something about revised terms, updated projections. "Nothing to worry about," she told people later. "Just paperwork." But paperwork has a way of becoming reality when ignored. Long enough, within weeks, those calls became more frequent, less casual, the tone shifting from informational to concerned. And I heard about them indirectly, through mutual contacts who mentioned she seemed stressed, distracted, not sleeping well, still confident publicly, but less polished around the edges. She stopped talking about renovations, stopped posting about future plans, started complaining about delays and misunderstandings, as if the world had suddenly become inefficient now that she was responsible for navigating it alone. The obligations she had skimmed over were no longer theoretical. They were invoices, deadlines, requirements that didn't care how hard her year had been or how much she felt she deserved relief. And the safety net she had always assumed would be there, my steadiness. My attention to detail, my habit of absorbing risk quietly was gone, not because I had taken it away, but because she had signed it over without questions she didn't have good answers for. Why certain costs were higher than expected, why timelines were tighter, why flexibility seemed to have vanished overnight, and she reacted the only way she knew how, by pushing harder, demanding more, insisting things would work if everyone just tried harder. But pressure doesn't create solutions when the structure underneath is already strained. It only exposes weaknesses faster. Somewhere in the middle of all this, she reached out to me, casually at first, a message framed as a check-in. "Hope you're doing okay. Things are busy but good here, just wanted to touch base." I read it once, then again, and recognized it for what it was, not concern, but instinct, the reflex to lean on something familiar when control starts to slip. I replied politely, briefly, wished her well, and left it at that, because stepping back would have meant resuming a role I had already outgrown, the role of buffer, of stabilizer, of the person who made chaos look manageable. And I was done performing that service. The situation continued to unravel quietly at first, then more visibly. Commitments collided with reality. Numbers stopped lining up the way optimistic projections had promised, and the confidence she had relied on as a substitute for preparation began to fail her, not all at once, but steadily, like water wearing down stone. The people who had celebrated her wins started offering advice instead of congratulations, caution instead of praise. And advice feels suspiciously like criticism when you're not used to needing it. She became defensive, short-tempered, impatient, blaming external factors, market conditions, other people's incompetence, anything except the possibility that she had misunderstood what she was taking on. Exactly where I had said I wanted to be: separate, quiet, rebuilding on a smaller scale, with fewer assumptions and more control. And that contrast, whether she admitted it or not, was what unsettled her the most, because it suggested that the story she had been telling herself, the one where she won and I lost, might not hold up under scrutiny. And once a story starts to crack, it rarely survives intact. The moment everything finally shifted wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, no public collapse, no single event that could be pointed to as the turning point. It was quieter than that, a slow realization settling in as patterns repeated and solutions failed to appear, the kind of realization that creeps in late at night when distractions are gone and numbers don't change no matter how many times they're checked. By then, the calls had stopped being optional, deadlines no longer flexible, and the language used by the people involved had hardened into something formal and unforgiving: compliance, liability, breach, words that don't care about confidence or intent, only execution. She tried to regain control the way she always had, by asserting authority, by reminding people of what she owned, what she was entitled to, what had been agreed upon. But ownership without understanding is fragile. And entitlement doesn't override structure, it only collides with it. The systems she inherited were designed for continuity, not reinvention. They assumed the same steady oversight they'd always had. And when that oversight disappeared, the cracks widened quickly. Costs that had once been absorbed quietly now surfaced all at once. Penalties triggered by missed thresholds compounded, and options narrowed with every delayed decision. She sought advice, acquaintances, anyone who would reassure her that this was temporary, that things like this happen all the time, and reassurance, while comforting, has a way of postponing action until action becomes damage control. By the time she consulted professionals, the tone had shifted again, from strategy to mitigation, from growth to survival. And survival feels very different when you're used to winning. I learned about most of this indirectly through conversations that trailed off awkwardly when I entered the room, through updates framed as gossip rather than concern, through the sudden absence of her name in places it used to dominate. And I didn't feel satisfaction the way people assume you would. What I felt was distance, emotional and practical, the clean kind that comes from knowing you're no longer responsible for outcomes you once managed invisibly. Eventually, she reached out again, this time without pretense. The message was shorter, more direct, asking if I'd be willing to talk, just to explain a few things, just to clarify how certain pieces used to work. There was no apology, but there was something else underneath the words, uncertainty, and uncertainty had never been her strength. I took longer to respond this time, not out of spite, but because I needed to be honest with myself about what stepping back into that conversation would mean. Explaining would turn into advising. Advising would turn into involvement. And involvement would slowly rebuild the very structure I had spent months dismantling politely, clearly, wishing her the best and nothing more. That refusal did more than any argument ever could have, because it forced her to face the reality that what she had taken wasn't missing a piece, it was missing a person. And people don't transfer with signatures. They opt out quietly when they realize their value has been reduced to assets and obligations. The fallout continued, reshaping her life in ways that weren't visible from the outside, but were deeply felt. Inside, decisions became reactive rather than intentional. Trust eroded, stress replaced confidence, and the future she had spoken about so freely became something she avoided describing altogether. Meanwhile, my own life settled into a rhythm that surprised even me. Smaller responsibilities, clearer boundaries, fewer assumptions, progress that wasn't flashy but was sustainable. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had taken everything that looked valuable, and I had walked away with the one thing. That actually was understanding not just of systems and structures, but of myself, of what I was willing to carry and what I would never carry again. And that understanding shaped every choice that followed. Long after the paperwork was filed away and the story stopped being interesting to anyone else, because in the end, the divorce didn't take something from me. It revealed what had been weighing me down all along. And once that weight was gone, everything else became lighter, quieter, and entirely my own.